Topics and tea. Topics and tea. Topics and tea. Topics and tea. Welcome to Topics and Tea. Welcome to Topics and Tea. Let me put my video on here. Welcome. We're back for a second session with candidate Alyia Gaskins, and we're going to just pull up some questions here on today. It is a very snowy and icy day, so hopefully everyone is remaining safe, all of you Alexandrians out there. So again, welcome to the second of 6 tea and topic sessions with a familiar face in some Alexandrian circles, but maybe new to others, Miss Alyia Gaskins, who is running for one of 6 seats on City Council. There she is waving. You can learn more about Alyia at www.AlyyiaForAlexandria. That's the word for spelled out, AlyyiaForAlexandria.com. Now, the purpose of these sessions is for the public, you, Alexandria, to start their morning with their favorite beverage. I have mine, and I have RBG as well. Their favorite beverage, it is cold outside, so hopefully you have some coffee or tea. Unwind and begin your day being heard as well as being informed. These sessions are meant to be informal, so we have some questions that residents who haven't been able to join us, they've submitted those questions in advance, and so we'll dialogue about some of those. And if anyone joins us live, we'll also let them in, and you guys, we can chat with us then as well. So as for our guests, if any join us on today, then we will make sure to have them answer some questions as well as our candidate. So key questions and themes from these dialogues will be summarized in the campaign's blogs. So we're going to just kick it off. Today is about education and child success. So Alyia, let's just set the atmosphere and start with an icebreaker for you and our listeners. So when I say the words education and child success, what are some of your immediate thoughts?
That is a great question. And good morning, Jennifer. Before I answer it, I just have to say that you are one of the most talented and amazing human beings I have ever met and have the pleasure to know. The intro music was new to me, and I was like, that is Jennifer, and that is beautiful. So I just had to take a minute to give you praise because my spirits are lifted. I guess when I hear those words, one word that comes to mind for me is potential, because I think that education, and when I think about child success, it should really be about how do we unlock the potential and invest in the potential of every one of our children.
Oh, wow.
But I'm curious what comes to mind for you.
The first question was, what did you think when you heard the phrase education and child success? And you said the word potential. It's interesting because my first reaction was stagnation. And it's like the complete opposite. And I'm not a pessimist, but I think as a social worker, I've seen a lot of youth either get pushed through school without the attention that they actually needed. They were more of behavior problems to some, so they got pushed through. But that pushing through without the proper care and teaching, et cetera, and learning how to not only manage and help someone through their work and achieve good grades, but also manage the behind the scenes that sometimes educators don't see. And those behavior challenges in the classroom, I think, has caused a lot of young people to just stagnate, in their progress. And also, when you think of equity, which we'll talk about today, that's something else that came to mind. So yeah, stagnation. So it's not as positive, but I love the fact that as a candidate, you're more positive.
No, but I would say, I think what you mentioned, though, it's not even being pessimistic. I think it's just real. I think those are the facts. And I think that we should be looking in our elected officials and our leaders for them to be partnering with not just our school, but social workers like you and other individuals who are working with and providing for and supporting our children, so that we don't lose hope in that potential and we don't lose hope in that opportunity, because that's what I would want to see us all working towards, so that stagnation doesn't become the norm, but
Right.
becomes like the exception, and eventually becomes like unacceptable for every child.
Absolutely, for every child. Okay. So in what ways has education and child success impacted you and your family? Like, and what have you learned from those experiences that you hope to bring to the office as a city council member?
Yeah. Um, Good question. So I will say my grandma was a kindergarten teacher for decades, and my mom is a para with Pittsburgh Public Schools. She was a librarian for a while. She's active in her teachers union. So education and success have been drilled into me and were always a really important part of my family. I mean, even now my mom will send multiple books, and I'm like, my son is 9 months. There's no more room in his little library. But when I think about this question, something that comes to mind for me, especially when you talk about a system where sometimes kids are pushed through or not receiving the supports they need. So I started out in public schools in Pittsburgh. And then there was an organization, still exists in Pittsburgh, called FAME, the Fund for the Advancement of Minority Education. And they provide a scholarship for Black children to be able to attend any of the independent or private schools within the city. And when I was in the 4th grade, my mom made me take a test, a placement test for the different schools. And I think as a child, I didn't really get why. I was really annoyed. I was convinced, like, I'm going to the same school as all my friends. Like, what is wrong with this woman? What's she talking
Another
about?
test.
I honestly, my protest didn't last very long. I ended up getting a scholarship to an all-girls independent school in Pittsburgh called Ellis.
Wow.
And it was transformative for me. I remember I started in 6th grade and I'd actually skipped kindergarten. And when I got there, I was so overwhelmed. Like, I was used to being number 1 in my class at my previous school. I could do my homework in my sleep. There, some of the students had been taking French since kindergarten. They, were reading these like books that were 500, 600 pages. They were just, we had like 9 different classes a day, and we were switching to different rooms, all of these schedules. Wow. And I'll never forget, they called my mom and I into the headmistress's office and said, we think Alyia should go back a grade. And I was like, whoa. Like, I'm already new here. I don't have any friends. Like, I'm just trying to get my footing. And my mom and I pushed back and said, absolutely not. And what they did in response then is they assigned a teacher to me. Like, her role was to help me get it together and help me figure out how to adjust to my new settings. Wow. All the way to something as small as, like, before I got on the bus to go to school, this woman, Miss Schaefer, would go to my locker with me, help me look through each of my classes and figure out what's the assignment for the night. And then what do I need to be successful in that assignment? So do I need to go to the library and get an extra book? Are there certain worksheets that I need to take? And all of that, like, really just transformed, like, my educational experience moving forward. That individual instruction was so critical to help me, like, just organize my thoughts, prepare, and figure out, like, what do I need to do in order to be successful in everything I undertake. I also think going to an all-girls school, it was a culture that women are supposed to speak up. Women are supposed to say what's on their mind. We are supposed to be at the table. And any idea you have is not, it is an idea to be reckoned with. You shouldn't silence yourself. And so I say that to say, I think a lesson, I don't even know if it's a lesson for Alexandria, but I think it's just a lesson in general, that we have to be thinking about how do we ensure that all children have the supports they need and in order to thrive. And I think that our schools have a lot of great curriculum and opportunities to do that. And I don't think that's my role as a city council member. What I do think, though, is on the things outside of the classroom, from housing to food access to transportation, and things that impact whether or not a child can take full advantage of what's happening in the school. I think that's where us as city leaders can be more of a partner in making sure that our families are stable and supported. So that's what comes to mind for me.
I think that's a great point that you made, that part of the role of a city council member is making sure that each child can take full part, like just be a full participant in the array of services. Just making that note here for us. That kind of leads me to another question, and this is a question from a resident. Education new, but the pandemic showed everyone how overdependent we are on the school system to provide far more than education. What opportunities do you see for the city council to collaborate with the school system to alleviate some of those pressures that ACPS may have, because their resources are limited and they're already strained, but yet they still want to provide for our neediest residents?
Yeah. I think what comes to mind for me in this question is just, what are the things that our young people are dealing with outside of school? And so when they go home, what are the conditions that their families are facing and that their families are navigating? And how can we as a city better support families in addressing that? Some of the options that come to mind for me, I think of housing, I think of food access, transportation. And so probably too many to just go into detail in this question, so I'll pick one. But if I think about housing, and I think about, we know, especially we talk about this a lot in public health, but we know that your housing is health, and where you live, both the physical conditions of where you live, but also what's around you impacts your physical, mental, and social well-being. And so if our young people are living in overcrowded housing, or housing that has mold or leaks or rodents or is in desperate need of repair, I think that is on the city to be working with our landlords to make sure, and our code inspectors to make sure that all housing is up to code and safe and high quality. It's continuing to work with the private sector and other partnerships to be able to make housing more affordable and alleviate some of the pressure on our families, which we know are working sometimes 2-3 jobs, just like my own mom, to make ends meet for their children.
Absolutely.
I think it's also making sure that, when we think of new housing developments, how are we partnering with our school leaders to think about the impact on our schools in terms of, the number of children, the number of seats, overcrowding, infrastructure. And I think, so all of those things are things that come to mind for me as ways that we can be a partner in the community and helping alleviate some of the pressure on our young people. One thing I've been thinking about is just how we use data even better in that conversation.
Yeah.
So if we know where our kids are, which we do, then how do we maybe map what are the resources they have within a mile of them? And does every child live in a neighborhood that provides them with the things that we know they need to thrive, from food to open space to not broken sidewalks so they could walk to and from school? And how then do we work backwards based on where the highest needs are to then ensure that around every kid is almost this like center of opportunity and center of support, so that when they go to school, they're able to, I think we said this earlier, fully take part in some of the great programs and great curriculum and things that our school system is putting together.
That's it. That's excellent. Excellent. Another question was, as you may know, the school board voted against co-locating public housing on school property. And so I know you just mentioned housing and how, in terms of health-wise, it's tied to education. So what other potential co-located uses should we be looking into as a city that could be on school property?
Yeah. So I was watching, I want to say it was kind of the school board work session on co-location. And I can't remember which school board member it was, but I thought they raised a really good point, because in the work session, staff had presented a number of different options, from a teen center, wellness center, fields, even co-location of staff offices. And I think those are all potentially really great uses. But what this particular school board member said was, how do we look at the data to know what use is most important at this time? And I don't know that answer, but I think that would be really critical. If we're partnering with our health department and they're showing that some of the, mental health or emotional needs of our students, or even other potential public health issues are really high, then to me, it speaks to, then that's an absolute, move for how do we think about a wellness center so that those resources are right there on site. If there's something else that's coming up as a potential need as well, I think we want to be nimble and able to shift and adjust to think about those opportunities. I think where my role is, I think those are school board decisions. And I think our school boards partnering with our parents to really think about what is the best need for our children. I think what our role is as our city grows, we're not getting more land. We're not getting, new space to do this. And so how do we make sure that any city planning decisions have our school leaders at the table so that we can plan together and think about those uses collectively?
No, that's good. So it's not, it doesn't sound like it's overstepping the decision of maybe school board, but it sounds more of a partnership.
Yes.
And that's great. And I think I saw they had an article about this in the Alexandria Times too, on the teen center potential, like the other potential uses. So that's good. There was another article I was reading. So the division-wide areas focus for ACPS from 2020 to 2025 school years are likely to include things such as balanced literacy, the social, emotional, and academic learning, family engagement, multi-tiered systems of support, and early warning systems to support students' academic and behavior needs. It's kind of similar to how you may have felt supported when you were growing up. And this includes causes of chronic absenteeism, right? So multiple pathways to high school diploma and beyond is also included. And I was just curious, what were your thoughts on some of these areas? And did you think that some of the areas were missing in the 5-year plan?
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember everything you said, and I think
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Well, from what I heard, from balanced literacy to social and emotional learning, I mean, I have to be honest, they all sound great to me. Yeah. I think my question is, how do we make sure that they are available and that we have the resources to make sure that every child is getting those supports and that no one is left behind. In terms of like my immediate thoughts, I think at the end you talked about pathways to college and pathways to high school diploma and beyond.
Right.
And one of the things that gets me really excited is I've been having a number of conversations with labor leaders in our community and learning about the different apprenticeships that they offer. Oh. And there are some apprenticeships that you can go into. I think you need a high school diploma, but there are also other supports and trainings that they offer in partnerships with schools all across the country. And so to me, I think that that's an area, we'd said it before, partnership is so key. It's a partnership between the schools and the city. And I think that means it's a partnership too within our labor and our businesses to make sure that we're creating those career pipelines so that if college is the option you want, you have the ability to do that. But if not, then there's options for jobs, and the certifications you need are available for you from the day you graduate so that you can get into some of these apprenticeship programs or some of these into other good paying jobs in the trades. So yeah, I would be not curious, but I would be thinking about how I leverage my role to cultivate some of those additional partnerships with businesses and labor leaders in our community.
No, I think that's a really good point. That's a great way for breaking down the school to prison pipeline as well, by having some better opportunities for our youth and doing some school to career pipelines. And so, and apprenticeships are so important, and I feel like they were much more valued when I was growing up. And so I don't really see them as much anymore. So yeah, those trades and opportunities are definitely essential. So it's not hard to mention COVID when discussing education, because I mean, we're in the midst of it, right? So what are your thoughts around the school response to COVID, and how do you feel that the mayor, city council, and school board should be working together on the issue?
Yeah. I think that, I was really impressed with our school's response. I think that at the end of the day, nobody knew how to prepare for something like this. Like this is unprecedented. That's the word that we always use. And I think our school, from what I've been reading, our school board and our school leaders have been in lockstep with the health department, waiting until the very last minute to close. And I think, even in thinking about some of the reopening conversations, I look on the news where schools that reopened had an outbreak, had to close, back and forth, and kind of the stress and chaos that created for families. I think fortunately we haven't had that. We've been very thoughtful and strategic and well planned, and kind of when do we reopen and how do we do it in a way that's safe for our children and families. I look at the fact that we're I think one of the first jurisdictions to be able to start vaccinating our teachers. So all of that, I think, are really positive things for our response. Right now I saw some of the pieces of the reopening plan, and I think we're on a path to start getting kids back in the classroom based on the new CDC guidance. At the end of the day, I won't necessarily comment on their overall response, because but I will say that I think at the end of the day, the word partnership that we've talked about just continues to be clear.
Right.
We have to be focused on how do we do these things together.
Yeah.
And I think whether it's COVID, whether it's housing, any issues that affect our young people, they affect our city as a whole. And so there has to be clear, concise, frequent, and often communication between all of the different entities. And I think that we as city officials, our role is to be not just that partner, but also an advocate. A lot of the COVID response,
Yes.
our supplies and materials come from the state and federal government. And so it's us really leveraging the influence and authority that we have to make sure that we're getting our fair share from the state and from the federal leaders as well.
Well, that definitely makes sense. It's a partnership, and advocacy is a big part of that as well. And the word advocacy actually leads to one of the final questions that came up, and it was around educational equity. So this was also in the plan, the district-wide plan as well for ACPS. And so it defined it as educational disparities based on race, economics, and other dimensions of difference are reduced and eliminated. Positive school outcomes are distributed equitably, it's too early to even say that word, equitably, proportionally across all demographic and identity groups. Negative outcomes and disproportionality are reduced for all groups. So I was taking a peek at the iDashboard for ACPS, and so I question if we need to do more, it's just my opinion, around supporting minority students. So, and for example, now I'm not an educator in Alexandria and I don't have children. Maybe that's why I didn't realize this. So I didn't realize that there were 4 levels of diplomas. And so apparently there's this advanced study diploma, a standard diploma, modified standard diploma, and the special diploma. So my understanding is that students who earn the advanced studies diploma are more likely to enroll in college, stay in college, and then earn a degree. And so we have about 70% Caucasian students achieving that type of diploma, while only under 4% of students with disability achieve that type of diploma, and between 20 and 50% of other minority groups receiving that type of diploma. So as a prospective city council member, have you given any thought around how equity could level the playing field and give every child a fair shot for college? And if you don't mind, in that response, kind of consider what would educational equity look like now that we have this blended instructional learning environment?
Yeah. Well, first off, I would say, I think it's amazing that we have that level of data, that you were able to find that just with a quick search. It sounds like you were just exploring and were able to get that. Because I think it's in the data that we're able to make meaningful choices, and choices that can be rooted in equity. So when I think of equity, I think it's important to say, to me, what I understand that means is giving people what they need, not giving everybody the same. And I think you have to be able to have the data disaggregated by race, disaggregated by income, and be able to really look at the layers beneath the numbers to understand then where are the highest needs in our system, and how do we then tailor our programs, our resources, and supports in order to address those needs. Because when we start with those who have the greatest needs, I think it really is true that we then learn how to support the whole system. I think that equity shouldn't I know in this context, we're talking about it from an education context, but I think that it should be across all of our decision making. And I think we're also really fortunate as a city to have, our chief race and social justice officer, maybe her official title, Jacqueline Tucker, and being able to think about then how do we work with her to use that same level of data, that same level of targeted and intentional approaches across any of the decisions we're making in our city, from our budget to street repaving to housing and other bigger decisions. So that's what comes to mind for me on that question. I'd be curious from your perspective, because I know you work more closely with our young people than I do, even though it's in the district. Sort of, what do you see every day as some of the greatest inequities, and what ideas would you have for Alexandria that we could move forward to address inequities in our system?
So some of the inequities that I see, and I was fortunate enough to do I guess we want to say the first virtual Alexandria City Academy, since it's usually in person, but Elaine was wonderful and we were able to do it virtually. And so we were able to virtually meet the new equity officer, who's wonderful. And I think the city is on track in terms of looking at policy, because even though I work in child welfare, I'm also, I work in the policy of child welfare too. So I've had the benefit of doing both clinical and the policy side of things. And so when you have situations, for example, of a child who is dealing with maybe struggles in their family, whether it's substance abuse or just a family that's in a cycle of poverty, and they may not be able to really respond, especially young children respond well to that in the classroom. They tend to not be able to, I feel like our educators, who are wonderful, in a lot of jurisdictions are not able to really respond well to that. And so it's either children are sent more to the principal's office, or children are more chastised, because they're not completing their work in the classroom, they're not doing certain things. I know there are a lot of jurisdictions now who have done more partnering with not just the school system, but with behavioral health systems, with law enforcement, with it's almost very similar to what we were talking about in Alexandria around, I want to say they mentioned it at the most recent budget meeting, where they wanted to partner law enforcement up with behavior specialists. But this even goes beyond that, because it's the school system, behavior specialists, including nurses, as well as school resource officers, et cetera, just to always make sure that every child is taken care of. And I think we kind of just miss the behavioral aspect. And when we don't recognize that people aren't waking up in a home that's completely without lead, or completely without leaks, or completely without, if they're not, unfortunately, if they are living in cycles of poverty, I feel like we have to include all of that into our thinking and how we're managing children, if that makes sense. I don't think we're thinking about that trauma aspect that continuously comes into the classroom. And when we don't include a trauma, and we don't make our schools trauma informed, then our children don't necessarily come out trauma informed to understand how best to manage their own challenges. And then our teachers will continuously feel unsupported, in my opinion. So that's what I've also seen in the district, since I work in the district but live in Alexandria. And I've seen it in different jurisdictions who have done more around making their school systems more trauma informed. And even in DC, we've created trauma centers. So so for those parents that are dealing with a lot of challenges in raising their family, and instead of removing a child from a family, those trauma centers are there to offer certain supports. So it's just making sure that the city, I feel like equity, if you're going to talk about putting the tools in people's hands that they need, then you have to actually make sure that you see everyone. So see every corner of your city. So see the individuals. And I think our city manager said it perfectly on the call the other day, that the city we have a great baseline, but we have to do better, even with putting materials out in different languages. So to me, that means that people are missing.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say I really appreciate you sharing your perspective, especially on like what it means to be trauma informed. Because I'm thinking even when I was getting my master's in urban planning, I think at that point we were starting to talk about, trauma informed in planning. And how do you take into account when you make decisions about the city? How do you take into account the impact that trauma has had on communities, whether that's like present day violence or poverty or racism, or even just the historical impacts of a place, and how what has happened in a particular place, that story doesn't just go away because maybe we've built a new building there or we've changed the design of that community. That is where people grew up. That is people's life. That is the landmarks that people recognize and feel. And so how do you incorporate that intentionally into the decisions you're making? How do you bring that out in community engagement so that you can provide healing and begin to design opportunities to create more resilient communities? And I think what comes to mind for me in this conversation, what you're raising, is that none of this, I think, is a black and white issue of like, okay, schools do equity, the city does not. This bucket does trauma, this one does not. I think if we're truly in partnership, then we have to be in alignment for how we think of equity across our whole city. And then each of the different pillars of our community become an opportunity for us to then look at what it takes to become more equitable in that space, from schools to businesses to, housing and transportation, as we've talked about a little bit.
I think that's a quote. Partnership means that we're all in alignment. I couldn't have said it better. This is why you're running for city council. You took all of that. I'm going around in circles, and you took all of that and just put it so beautifully and succinctly. You got my vote. So, but
well, I'm gonna say I need to get. You look like the candidate over there. I was like, I need a background like Jennifer with this CNN bookcase here with all of the books.
Yeah, and you love reading, and so so this has been a treat, in spite of the weather and some of the internet issues that we've had this morning. So I greatly appreciate your time, Alyia. And so we'll just close out by again thanking you, and thanking those who submitted questions. This has been very helpful again in getting to know you and some of your views now on the topic of education and child success. And do you have any concluding remarks that you would like to make?
I would just say first, thank you to you. I love starting my morning with you and doing these sessions and getting to hear your ideas as well, because I think that, you are an Alexandria resident, and I believe that the solutions to some of our greatest issues are here in our community. We have some of the best and brightest people, just creative thinkers. And so being able to dialogue with you gives me ideas that I hope I will be able to implement and carry forth on city council. And I would just say to folks who were not able to join us, keep the questions coming. You can submit them via social media. You can even email the campaign at info@AlyyiaForAlexandria.com. And yeah, we will get back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So if you also go to Alyia's website, again, AlyyiaForAlexandria.com, and the 4 is spelled out, AlyyiaForAlexandria.com, and I'll just actually spell it out for you all, ALYIAFOR Alexandria.com. You can also find out how to engage with her campaign, etc. See some of the endorsements, and you may want to make your own endorsements. So definitely check that out. And because this was about education, check out the city's data dashboard. And so you can just go to alexandria.gov/performance, and or just type in education, and you'll get some data information for ACPS. So again, stay safe, wear a mask even if you get your vaccination, and bless all of our teachers who are getting their vaccinations now. So great job, Alexandria. So again, thank you, candidate Gaskins, for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from Alexandria's as well as this candidate at our next Tea and Topics on March the 4th at 8:30 a.m. when we will discuss neighborhoods. Thank you all.